Chapter 701 Deal with the Devil. No one knows, you know. As those words danced in the air, Justin struggled to comprehend their meaning. Perhaps this was because his heart was beating too fast, and the loud pounding in his head just wouldn't stop. He found himself barely clinging onto Ader's words. This felt like a haze. A dream. No, not a dream. This had to be a nightmare. He was helpless, paralyzed in sheer hopelessness as he listened to Ader's words as the latter circled around him, like a shark swirling around a wounded prey in bloodied waters. Ray, Bell. All of them don't know about you yet. Not to the extent that I do, Justin Blake. Saliva was stuck in Justin's throat, but he was too frightened to swallow. Now, if you do not wish to be exposed, then you will listen to me well and do as I say. Is that understood? As Ader asked this, Justin made no response. He simply froze there, blankly staring at the man. I said. Is that understood? As Ader drew closer, filling him with even more of his malevolent aura, Justin forcefully swallowed his saliva and shuddered in recoil. He quickly bobbed his head, nodding ferociously as he took a few steps back. I understand. I understand. Good. If you do, then relax. Sit down and let's talk. Ader smiled, plopping to sit in what could be defined as mid-air. Justin looked around him, but there was no available place to really sit. The only place left was the filthy ground, and someone of his caliber was not accustomed to such an action. Still, he didn't have a choice, did he? He had to do as Ader said. Oh, okay. As Justin began lowering himself to sit on the ground, he found himself occupying a rather soft, cushiony sofa. Yet, before he could even process the sensation, he realized that his environment was completely different from what he had just noticed a second ago. Not only were there no walls, fences, or any familiar sights associated with the royal estate's expansive compound, but the place that Justin found himself in was indoors. It was a place he recognized all too well. This is. The impossibly high ceiling, the incredible vastness, and the remnant malevolence, all of it sent chilling memories flooding Justin's faculties. The Grand Calamity class dungeon. He gawked, slowly turning to look at Ader, who was also on a sofa similar to his, with a center table separating them. Right. Indeed. Ader's confirmation made Justin look around him once again. On the second look, he noticed a lot of changes in this dungeon. For one, it appeared perfectly polished worlds apart from the grimy and unkempt state that the dungeon had in previous memory. The ancient walls still had the effect of age to them, but with a much more pristine effect than ever before. Most of the ground floor was still an empty space, but it looked squeaky clean and perfectly renovated. Justin could find no flaw with it no matter how hard he looked. I decided to do a little cleaning to surprise Master, considering the plans he has for this place. What do you think? Do you reckon he'll like it? Justin was speechless. He didn't even think his input was necessary. The state of the dungeon, at the very least, the ground floor that he was in, was more than enough to speak for itself. I think he'll like it a lot. Is that so? He. Then I suppose all of that effort wasn't for nothing. Ader's smile was not malevolent this time. It was so pure, almost childish, as if he was a child who looked forward to seeing the proud look in their parents' eyes after a job well done. Justin could not comprehend this sudden change in vibe, but it wasn't like he was fated to witness it for very long. In merely a few seconds, Ader's demeanor changed back to what it previously was. A mask of evil and chaos. I'm in a good mood, Justin, so I don't plan to hound you too much. After getting a gist of your situation, and also hearing your clearly unbiased thoughts on this place, I think I'm going to let you off easy. Justin was confused, conflicted, and a lot more. He didn't even know how they arrived here, talkless of what Ader could be talking about at the given period. He was completely at Ader's mercy, and that already made his future too bleak to consider. Still, who didn't like the sound of mercy? You are doing this for your family, right? I completely understand. Family. Family is really important, right? You really are a good kid, aren't you? You want to go home. Do right by your folks, even that girl that you're so fond of. Justin's eyes twitched the moment Ader mentioned his girl. He never told him about that, so how in the world did he know? More shivers coursed through his veins, but he endured. Here's how this works, Justin. I want you on my side. That's the only way you walk out of this in one piece. Join me. Or die. Any man, when confronted with a chance for their survival, would always choose the option that best led to it. But, it wasn't so simple for Justin. I can't. If I betray Adrian, I die. He whimpered, sighing as he hung his head on his weak shoulders. How so? I am not allowed to say. For a moment, tense silence permeated the room. The world around them was in an eerie state, completely devolving into one of despair. Why so serious? Ader chuckled, breaking all of that with a single question. What? To Justin, the one whose life hung in the balance, he couldn't comprehend the question. Why wouldn't he be serious? He was facing possible death here. I already know what card Adrian holds against you. Ader chuckled even more as he relaxed on his seat. With warbling eyes that seemed to be reminiscent of blood, he parted his lips and let out the steep revelation. Your soul. Chapter 702 Deal with the Devil. I only wanted to live. Justin wanted to live for his family, for the ones he cared about most, so he could return home one day. That desire turned into obsession after witnessing death for the first time. First it was with Adam, and then during the dungeon rescue of Brutus, he witnessed even more people perish. Despite performing his role well, he found himself at the edge of death so many times. To many, he was always the optimist, the jovial guy with no care in the world. But inside, he was being torn apart. He had countless nightmares of death that it eventually caused him so many sleepless nights. All of this compounded, becoming worse by day. Until I can't take it anymore. Justin grew desperate. So desperate in fact that he made a deal with Adrian at the time, after being offered a way to preserve his life and escape death. He would need to become an undead, a high-class one, of course, but still an undead. With this new change of race, he would be immune to fatal damage and a lot of status conditions that would adversely affect humans. He would no longer need to sleep, hence preventing the nightmares from plaguing him. Best of all, he would become stronger. With all of these on the platter, there was already very little chance that he could refuse. However, Adrian also threw one more thing into the mix. I'm working on something that'll get all of us home. Join my side, and you can be a part of it. That sold it for him. There was no way he could refuse at that point. Even if the cost of the deal was his life itself. The price he had to pay to attain his desires was to relinquish the one thing that could cause his demise, his soul. As an undead, as long as you have your soul intact, you can't really die. Since it belongs to Adrian and it is in his possession. One can even say it benefits you the most, since any attacks on your soul wouldn't kill you anyway. is what you tell yourself to feel better about your entire arrangement. Isn't it? Ader's question poked right into Justin's heart, but the boy could say nothing. If he did so, his demise was inevitable. With this arrangement, only Adrian can kill you since he has your soul hostage. I'm sure you've made some pre-existing arrangement that prevents you from doing some things. Such as telling me the details of such an arrangement. Doing so would alert Adrian, and he wouldn't hesitate to finish you off since you're nothing but a tool to him. The more Ader spoke, the more Justin felt pricks in his heart. He got everything right, and the very thought that someone could figure it all out without him opening his lips to say a word was frightening in itself. It only made the helpless boy wonder just how much Ader knew about selling your soul for returning home. That sounds so poetic. Ader seemed to be making fun of his decision, but Justin did not regret it one bit. He could count at least 3 instances where he would have already died without the perks of being an undead. He didn't regret his decision since it helped him live this long. If only he hadn't gotten caught, then maybe he would have actually. What if I told you that I could break these shackles holding you back? Even making you stronger in the process. Justin's eyes widened and his brows were raised as he heard this. After hearing all that Ader had said, and seeing some of the things he could do, there was no doubt in Justin's mind as to the capabilities of this man. Even judging from his incredibly confident demeanor, it was clear that this man could back up his words. The question, however, was why? Why would you choose to go this far for me? Justin spat out. He was a traitor who backstabbed everyone and was working secretly for a deserter. He hid his strength in critical moments, and even though it was likely that he could have prevented Eric's death, he did no such thing. Even he hated himself for all of these, and yet. I quite like you, Justin. I believe you have potential, and I suspect it's why Adrian chose you as well. Really? Of course not. You're just easier to manipulate because you have things you hold dear, and a very strong desire to achieve your dreams. Ader laughed, causing Justin's slightly hopeful face to crumble in an instant. He never once thought of himself as special or especially intelligent, but this was the first time hearing that he was easy to manipulate. Listen well. The most difficult people to control are those who have nothing to lose. As long as stakes exist, there will always be those who can see them. Justin didn't even have the chance to process what Ader said before he was bombarded with another volley of information. I am the person you've been talking to all week, not Adrian. I'm certain he doesn't know the recent occurrences in the capital. Even if he does, it is only to the extent that Master does, which is why I've intentionally limited the information I distributed. Just in case. Why you were? Yes. I have been observing you for some time too. Adrian's little dog. Sniffing for clues and information for your owner. Well, I don't want that for you, Justin. You deserve better, you know. What? Isn't that what you're trying to turn me into? A loyal dog. I'm more of a cat person, you know. But that's besides the point. Ader shrugged those words away as if they were nothing. I want you to be my subordinate, Justin. I treat my subordinates well, you know. And if you agree, everything you desire will be yours. Justin watched Ader in silence, waiting for a few moments before getting the inevitable question. So, what do you say? Chapter 703 Deal with the Devil. Aye. Justin didn't have a choice in the matter, the way he saw it. If he didn't accept the deal, Ader was definitely going to do something incredibly awful to him. Ader knew all about his arrangement with Adrian, including the soul issue, yet he was confident in killing him. That meant there were other ways he could die, ways he didn't know yet. Adrian told me not to get overconfident about my immortality, so this is what he was talking about. Justin sighed. If he can somehow save me from Adrian's grasp, spare my life, and make me stronger, is there really a reason to refuse? This was essentially just changing owners. It was the same job, but now he would be working for a different person. Adrian is searching for a way home, which I would be losing out on if I follow this man. But I just have to bring it to his notice. I have some conditions to make before I. No conditions can be made. This is not a negotiation, but a simple choice. Ader interrupted Justin before he could complete his statement. I know you desire to go home, and your deal with Adrian somewhat gives you that guarantee. You aren't sure you have that kind of security with me, which is fair. I won't make that promise to you, but you should also be aware that Adrian could just as well not keep his side of the deal. And you can't stop him. Justin already knew that, which was why he had very loose loyalty to Adrian. Thanks to Ader's words, more doubt began to creep into Justin's mind. Was there really a way home? Was he going to ever see his family again? He didn't know for sure. I can promise you this, Justin. Ader maintained his confident smile as he spoke. You will see your family again. Oh, really? He whispered. Was this a moment when Ader would laugh at him, or maybe mock him for being easily manipulated? Was it? No. Not at all. Yes. If you serve me well, you will meet them and have your happy ending however you want it. Isn't that great? A concrete future that you can count on. I am not sure I can count on you, though. True. Which is why I told you that this isn't a negotiation. Ader shrugged, almost as if he couldn't be bothered by Justin's skepticism. You already know you have two options at the moment. Join me. Or die. I believe you already know which is the best way to achieve your goals. You're sensible, at the very least. Yes. Justin already knew. I get it. And, just to confirm, if I join you, you'll undo the whole soul stuff with Adrian, right? You wouldn't be of much use to me if you're still on his leash, so of course I'll liberate you from his clutches. And then you'll own my soul. That won't be necessary. I do not need to own or even be in possession of it to affect it. I'll make sure to protect it from any external attacks, though, so you should still be safe for the most part. What does that even mean? Justin, at this point, was in way over his head. He could not really grasp Ader's explanation. Okay, I'll try to simplify this whole deal to you so that even you can get it. Justin ignored the clearly condescending tone and use of words that Ader employed. Partly because he had no choice in the matter, but also because he was interested in what came next. You have your soul with Adrian, but it's impossible for your body to function without a soul occupying it, so only a portion is with you, while the rest is with Adrian. Both of them share a connection that tethers them to each other. Are you following so far? Why yet? Now, what I'm going to do is surgically separate the piece of your soul that occupies your body from the one with Adrian. That would. But wouldn't that kill me? Or maybe make me lose some of my memories or power. It's my soul, after all. Ader shook his head and sighed. Sorry. Please just go on. Justin swiftly apologized, scratching his head sheepishly. Phew. Fine, I'll explain soul theory to you. Soul theory. Your soul isn't like your body. It doesn't have an arm or leg with distinct functions or parts to them. If you amputate a hand, you've damaged the whole body, and if it isn't healed, the body becomes incomplete forever. But with a soul, it's different. While it is possible to harm a soul, you can't damage it permanently by just attacking a portion of it. Really? Yes. You attack the whole thing. It's why Adrian has the soul with him tethered to the soul with you. That way there's a constant connection that he exclusively has access to. If he wishes to harm you, he'll attack your soul through the connection, damaging both pieces. So, by removing the connection this piece shares with his, he won't be able to harm my soul any longer. Indeed. Though, you are right in the fact that you'll lose a great deal of your power and potential if you lose that chunk that exists with him. Every living entity's true ability depends on the state of the soul, after all. Before Justin could say anything after gasping, Ada raised a finger in the air to prevent him from speaking. Fortunately for you, I have the perfect solution. I'll supplement your soul with lots of nourishment so you'll be even stronger than ever. You can do that. Yup. You'll become as... Maybe a Dragon Lord will be your limit. The Dragon Lord. Justin remembered the appearance of the Dragon Lord that shook everyone to their core. He could never hope to go against that, and yet, he was hearing that he would be able to stand against such an entity. That sounded surreal. I agree. When do we start? As soon as Justin said this, Ader grinned devilishly, instantly vanishing from where he sat. Squelch. A hand pierced Justin's chest, causing the boy to instantly lose consciousness, and the silhouette responsible for that let out a soft whisper. Right now. Chapter 704 Approaching Climax. I really don't feel any different. Justin and Ader stood face to face in the vast hall that was the Grand Calamity class dungeon. Indeed, just as he said, the former didn't look any different from how he always was. He still had his handsome face, dirty brown hair, and overall tall and lean build. He seemed the same. Adrian will try to make contact with you soon, so you're going to forget a lot of what happened here until the due time. Completely ignoring all of Justin's concerns about his body, Ader simply went straight to business. You will be loyal to Adrian for the time being, until I am ready to use you for certain plans I have. But, if you're wondering how Adrian won't notice that you aren't tethered to him, it's because when I surgically severed your connection to that soul, I copied a portion of it and linked it to Adrian's copy. In essence, he still thinks you are linked. How can you do all of these things? Justin wondered aloud, staring at Ader with sheer stupefaction. That is not for you to know. Your limits will never allow you to attain that height. Upon hearing those words, Justin's face sank deeper. It almost felt like he was stomped on, but with words. Don't be so downcast. You should be grateful for your lot and be content with it. That is what nature has determined for you. Seeking any more would be venturing deeply into greed. Is greed such a bad thing? For those who cannot possibly attain anything greater, greed is useless. It leads to hollow hubris that tends to drive men into madness and destruction. Just remain where you are and allow yourself to indulge in the desires afforded to you. Chase after your purpose and do not seek out a wider ocean outside your pool. That is the best way you can find happiness. Ader smiled at him, placing a hand on his shoulder. In essence, I should know my place. Correct. You really are quite sharp, aren't you? For some reason, despite hearing demeaning words in the most brutal of ways, Justin felt a certain kind of relief wash over him. There was a strange sense of pride derived from Ader's words that caused him to smile. You're very mean with your words. I prefer it this way. Ader shrugged, removing his hand from Justin as they both smiled at each other. Me too. For a moment, silence reigned between the two of them as they simply stared at each other. What exactly are you up to? This grand scheme of yours. When does it take place? A chuckle escaped Ader's lips as he stared keenly at Justin. Before he responded, he walked away from the young man and took a few steps forward. Crackles of energy danced around him, as well as Justin, as the world around them seemed to change and distort at a rapid pace. That is a surprise. The clacks of polished black shoes hitting the ground echoed softly as Ader walked within a hallway, both hands in his pockets as he smiled. He had several thoughts flashing through his mind about his new pawn, his plan's progression, and most importantly, his master. All of these thoughts were neatly organized and immaculately calculated, just as the steps he made as he approached the door that stood in front of him. Once this is complete, all that's left is the big one. Ader felt the knob of the door twist in no time, and before long he entered into the room to meet a few people already occupying one portion of the room. He already knew who they were, so he merely smiled as he walked in. You all finally made it? The girl who sat at the center of the huge sofa grinned as she looked at Ader's surroundings, but not directly at him. She was clearly seeing something that wasn't real, something he constructed. Well, it's been a while indeed, Justin. The other girl in the group of deserters giggled, blushing slightly as she tried to hide how happy she was. The others around her rolled her eyes as they trailed invisible newcomers to the sofa that existed opposite them. Ader watched all of this in silence, already realizing what was happening. He was the one who orchestrated everything, after all. Right now, the deserters think they are having a conversation with the other worlders. They see Justin, Belle, Clark, and Trisha right now. His thoughts trailed as he watched them converse passionately. They'll do their best to convince the other worlders to join their side, and Felicia will go as far as kissing all of them to make sure they do as she commands. Of course, in order not to make the whole thing suspicious, she'll have to do it discreetly, meeting them one-on-one right after the meeting. Ader already knew her line of reasoning, and he planned on making it so the illusion they all experienced flowed according to her expectations, just as everything thus far had been going for them. Once all the other worlders agree to join their side, the deal will be sealed. Then, all that is left will be the promised day. The climax of this little game I've made. He could feel his lips curling upward as he displayed visible signs of excitement towards the results. As he concluded that line of thought, he proceeded to another. Master and Adrian should have already reached some sort of compromise by now, if not even striking an alliance. That should lead to some rather interesting turn of events over there, and I hope it goes as predicted. His eyes narrowed as he remembered one key figure in the whole thing, and for a few seconds, he remained motionless. Even as the voices of the deserters grew louder, and echoes constantly filled the air, Ader remained steadfast in his thoughts. Everything seemed fixated on that one entity. Don't forget the deal we made, Emil. I'm counting on you over there. Chapter 705 The Great Elven War. The plan remains the same. The three dragon generals stood before their army of thousands of dragons, their smiles broad as they felt some form of anticipation in their bones. Arazak, Uriah, and Cephas had stayed out of the battle long enough. However, now that they were all participating in the war against the elves, the situation had now taken a turn for the better. The morale of the dragon troops increased exponentially upon hearing of this news, so the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. The 12 commanders were also going to join the battle too. Having their leadership in the war, and their power in the overwhelming battle to come reassured the dragons who looked up to them all. Right now, the generals were addressing the newts and soldiers who watched with clear attention and resolved to fulfill their role to the empire. Since most of them had not fought for a very long time since the intervention of Adrian, there was a kind of anticipation that dwelled in their eyes. Dragons were beings of chaos, after all, and so their unsated hunger for death and destruction made them more than happy to receive the news of their grand attack on the elves. Adrian stood among the dragons who were being addressed by the dragon generals, smiling just as they were, with his own thoughts flowing as they made their point. He's basically restating what was discussed in the meeting, but leaving out the details. There's no need for foot soldiers and dispensable pawns to know the full picture. That role belongs to those commanding them. And as for the plan itself, Adrian didn't think it was particularly bad. Sure, it felt a little simplistic, but considering the way the elves attacked, having a very simple but effective plan seemed like the way to go. My undead army will attack from the front, same as always then. The dragon army will attack them from behind. Adrian nearly chuckled to himself as he went over the strategy that would be implemented. Commanders would also attack from the right and left flanks, leaving no wiggle room for escape. Thankfully, we have a lot of air power, so the dragons have a major field advantage. He smiled and nodded one final time. The most twisted part of the plan involved the dragon generals themselves. While all the efforts are being concentrated on the battlefield, the generals will head to the elf community and wreak havoc there. If they manage to kill the esteemed elders, it'll severely weaken the entire resistance. That was the rationale behind their assault, and to be honest, it was great. There was only a single issue about the whole thing, and it was one that Adrian decided to pitch in to help the movement. I promised to keep the benefactor of the elves busy while they destroy the community and severely weaken everything. That's the best way I can pull my weight in this, outside of my disposable army. Adrian was one who prided himself as a realist, so almost as soon as he considered Ray as an enemy, he burst out into a chuckle and shook his head. I can't beat him. But, he didn't have to. He just had to make it seem like he was doing his best and working so that the dragons could win. Do we all understand? As the thunderous voice of the generals rang in the air, lost echoes of dragons tuned into the loudest of volumes. Yes, yeah. Fire. Whoosh. Just as was the plan with the dragons, so was the execution. The undead monsters rushed towards the elven camp in droves, their overwhelming number seemingly increasing with every step they took. A dark cloud of miasma hung above them like a thundercloud of heavy rain, or an unstoppable storm, that could not stop. Then, there were the troublesome undead dragons that dominated the skies. Steam proceeded from their jaws as they shot perverse energy as breaths and intensely burned everything in their path. In the intensity of this moment, however, the elves stood firm. They already had a sanctuary that served as the perfect base to protect them. With the plan that they had been using so far, which worked effectively to their benefit, they stuck to their projectiles and kept firing. They also relied on their foot soldiers, the ones who felt no such thing as pain, and overwhelmed the dragons during the last scuffles. The elementals were already stationed before the walls of the camp, so the moment the undead monsters reached a certain distance, all of them whirred to life in an instant. The absolute elemental general, which stood at the forefront of the army, was the first to move and set himself ablaze with energy. In no time at all, the rest followed suit. Fire, water, earth, air, lightning. Varying colors representing the elements shot up into the sky as each elemental lit the world around them, and the one that was slowly closing in on them. With all of this set up, an intense battle was afoot. Boom. Noises like this filled the battlefield, as terror-filled screeches constantly rang across the expansive field of nightmares. As undead and elementals fought, the elves did their best to take down the flying creatures who constantly tried to reduce the integrity of their battery. Even though the battlefield was rough, the elves still had most of things under control. They were the ones manipulating the flow of battle, all from a safe distance. However, in life, the most unexpected could ruin everything. The elves learned that lesson at the moment when, during their echoes of victory and excitement, they suddenly heard noise. Rumble. At first, many dismissed at mere tremors. But, they got louder with every passing noise and vibration it made. Rumble. It seemed whatever this was. It was getting closer. Rumble. No one knew what it was, and just as apprehension mixed with curiosity was about to perfectly mix within the heart of the elves, a certain elf ran towards the battle area. She was out of breath, and her terrified face was pale. Still, she found the strength to raise her voice and inform them of the source of the rumble. The dragons are at our rear. Chapter 706 The Great Elven War. The dragons opened their frightening jaws and released blasts of destruction from the depths of their throats. The intensity of their breaths burned the barrier that protected the elven camp from invaders. At first, it stood upright, completely pushing back the flames of devastation that were constantly being pushed out. Eventually, however, the barrier had to collapse. Once it did, the dragons all grinned to themselves, watching as the rear of the elves' base was now breached. It was time for the next phase of their plan: slaughter all of the elves. Whoosh! Wings flapped as the horde of thousands of dragons charged towards the camp, their wide eyes ready to devastate their prey with combined, unbridled violence. Boom! The ground cracked wide open as flames crashed upon it, sending fiery debris flying in multiple directions. The elves that were meant to be watching, or rather, guarding the rear, were sent flying back as a result of the intense flames that neared them. If it hit them, the result would be their demise. But sanctuary. The voice of a certain elf rang out, completely altering the intense situation of helplessness that had permeated everything within the camp's rear. As those words echoed out, a glimmering barrier was cast over the immediate area where all the elves were huddled together, completely shielding them from the wrath of the beings above. Everything else in the rear was burned to cinders, but thankfully all the elves were saved. Thankfully. As all the elves looked up to witness their savior, they found one of their own, the one hailed to be the strongest of all the elves. She was adorned in a perfectly sewn white and green gown, with her enchanting hair dancing behind her as she held her staff gracefully. She was currently donning some enchanted items, such as a special necklace, bracelets, and even rings. Amidst all of this, though, she clung tightly to her staff, glaring deeply at the aggressors who broke into their fortified place. Lady Faralia. Lady. Why you came to save us? They were smitten by her valiant presence, but she didn't allow any of the girls to grow comfortable due to her being present. She inhaled deeply and closely observed all of the elves behind her in a moment. None of them were strong enough to assist her. Go. Retreat. Now. They were all reluctant to just abandon their sister, but they better than to disobey others. It was also clear that they would slow her down. Realizing this quickly, they all nodded and fled. Hugh. Faralia stole one more glance at the elves and smiled at them running off while she exhaled deeply. Her sanctuary, the most powerful defense she could render at the moment, was reaching expiration rather quickly, and she had to find a way to defeat thousands of dragons on her own. As she watched them from the golden enclosure, still seeing the bright bursts of flames as they lived the ground and her barrier almost as if they couldn't wait to get in, she steeled her heart and readied her body. It's shocking how they just appeared out of nowhere. I'll be having backup when the others mobilize, but until then, I have to do this on my own. She was much stronger than a dragon commander, so she was certain that when facing just newts and soldiers, she would fare well. In fact, she would fare better than well. The real problem was their number and advantage in the sky. Still, since there is only one of me, as long as I know what I am doing, I should be able to stall them for as long as possible. Either until the elementals could come to the rear to handle the dragons, or for the projectiles to be used against these ones. Unfortunately, both of those options required time before they could be viable. And so, until then, I'm on my own. Whoosh. The moment her sanctuary collapsed, Feralia shot up into the sky like a rocket, her body shimmering with golden aura. It felt like space itself blurred thanks to the intensity of her speed. Before long, she had ascended to the same level as the dragons. I'll use elemental magic to remain in the air, I'll focus more on evasion and defense. The goal is to make sure they don't advance very far. It was a tall order for one person to handle, but Feralia was the strongest elf. If anyone could pull it off, it had to be her. Wuthering waves clash and fall, rise and swirl into a fine storm. She pointed her staff forward as she watched the dragons ready to launch a combined wave of dragon breaths towards her, intending on incinerating her to death, no doubt. However, she was just a moment faster. Absolute elemental storm. A swirling mass of pure energy, or rather, the amalgamation of elements, which birthed a pure display of energy, swelled out of nowhere and crashed upon the wave of dragons that lined up before Feralia. Their premature breaths were not sufficient to quell the storm, and the intensity only increased the more it gained momentum. Dragon newts and dragon soldiers were capable of B2A tier skills at the maximum, so it was no wonder that they could not handle the spell that Feralia dished out, which dwelled in the realm of the absolute. Not only that, but she was also being buffed by her enchanted items, so her spell's intensity and range was amplified. The result: a fierce storm that threw the dragon army into disarray was born. Their formation was ruined thanks to the absolute elemental storm. While the spell wasn't particularly fatal for them, due to being spread over a wide range, the pulsating energy was enough to disorient the dragons for a limited period of time. And with their defenses being brought so low, as well as her mana saturating the atmosphere for that fleeting moment, all the conditions were fulfilled for Feralia's next trick. Her ultimate skill. Chapter 707: The Great Elven War. It was an exclusive skill that belonged to Feralia, one that served as her ultimate card, but one she also had to utilize sparingly. Not only could she only use it once a day, but it also consumed a great deal of mana to utilize. It allowed her to completely halt the flow of time of anything she, or a portion of her energy, had contact with. In essence, she could freeze any target of hers in time. The duration for time stop depended on how much energy she expended in the period of activation, and since it usually took up a great deal of energy, it usually didn't last very long. But things were different now. Feralia had access to the mana within the enchanted items that she equipped, as well as the boosted effects of being saved by Ray's energy. She was a far stronger entity than in the past. Still, even with all of these advantages on her end, there was one thing she had to consider. This was the first time she would be using on so many targets at once. These were thousands of dragons. There was no way her skill would be able to work on them normally, not with the strict conditions necessary to activate them. That was why she first resorted to the absolute elemental storm. This achieved two purposes, and its success was what led to her next act. With the storm successfully affecting the army of dragons, they became vulnerable to the effects of, and since her energy had permeated the entire area, she could cast the skill en masse. The result. Bwuyuum. Every single dragon froze in the sky, completely rendered still by the effects of her. Ha! Faralia felt a bit pale as she watched all the enemies stay vulnerable before her. The horde was at a complete standstill. Good. With this, I've bought some time. As she mumbled this to herself, she couldn't help but feel slightly lightheaded. I expended way too much mana. They'll be like this for a short while, but hopefully that's enough for me to recover my mana and for backup to arrive. Fsheen. While smiling to herself, albeit tiredly, she failed to recognize the silhouette that manifested behind her. Not until it was too late. Impressive. A voice echoed very deeply, causing her entire body to shiver at that very moment. It appeared right behind her, and the goosebumps she felt the moment she heard that single word caused her trembling body to freeze. Her instincts told her to run, but not a single finger could be lifted. She was paralyzed. Aye. With her eyes bulging, she witnessed the dragons get released from her skill. All of them now floating towards the camp as fiery hot energy began to manifest from within their gaping mouths. It turned out she wasn't able to buy any time at all. Tears of sorrow would have gushed out of her wide eyes if not for the fear that she was experiencing. Death was right behind her, raising the scythe to send her to the underworld. She could not even see the face of her executioner. She only felt the intense gaze and incredible bloodlust they oozed. It was the end. Clang. All of a sudden, the noise of blades clashing together resounded in the air. Faralia suddenly found herself in the embrace of someone, feeling the familiar warmth and smell ooze through her as she surrendered to the man's grasp. "Why you?" she whispered, her voice lacking any kind of strength whatsoever. Her heart raced this time not because of anxiety or fear, but because of the man that held her tight. His presence offered her comfort, and the look on his face as she gazed upon him, that confident smile that he had, was out of this world. She felt, at long last, perfectly safe. "Sorry I'm late." As his voice reverberated in her ears, she closed her eyes and shook her head slightly, pressing her body more on his reliable frame. "No, you're right on time, Ray." The man who had arrived was Ray, and his blade was currently pitted against the descending slash that would have ended her life. "Give me a moment," he whispered, and then the next thing that happened became a blur. Bwooyish. The air around Faralia vibrated, and she felt everything around her distort. It felt like space itself collapsed within a fraction of a moment, and the next thing she realized, she was on the ground, the familiar ground of the camp. "Stay here," Ray told her, his dark hair fluttering with the violent night wind. His two eyes were exposed, and they shone bright red. His outfit, a dark fur coat, with completely black garment, and traces of red here and there, was in perfect blend with his hair. Everything about him, the full darkness, oozed both danger and comfort. As soon as he told her this, though, the figure that appeared behind her back not too long ago suddenly descended from the sky in a flash of lightning. Faralia was able to see his face for the first time that night, and the moment she did, she was reminded of the angel of death that was responsible for the undying dragons. He was the one who put her in such a critical state, the one that Ray had cured. "Don't worry." The comforting voice of her savior danced in her ears the moment she was about to tremble out of fear or unease. "I'll take care of him." At that moment, Faralia could not control her feelings any longer. She drew closer to Ray and kissed him on the cheek. "Thank you so much for everything." As she said this, Staring deep into his eyes, he kept his gaze fixed on the enemy, though returning her smile in his usual charming fashion. "You're welcome." Before she could say any more, whoosh! He had vanished from her arms and now charged towards the enemy. Asterisk. 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 Thanks for reading. Remember to check the Discord server for the novel trailer.